After 27 years of marriage, he told me he'd found someone younger, someone who made him feel alive again. At 66, I'd suddenly become invisible, in my own home, replaced by a woman who wore my clothes, slept in my bed, and drank coffee from my favorite mug. They thought I'd disappear quietly, erased and humiliated. But there was one detail they forgot to check. My name was still on that deed, and this quiet, forgotten woman was about to remind them exactly who owned the house. I gave Clifford the best years of my life, 27 of them to be exact. I washed his shirts, packed his lunches, stood by him when he lost his job, and celebrated every little promotion like we'd won the lottery. I wasn't just his wife. I was his partner in everything. We raised 2 kids, built a home, and even adopted Otis, our golden retriever. When the house got too quiet, I truly believed we'd grow old together. I had no reason to doubt him. But something changed. He started working late, skipping dinner, wearing cologne he never used before. I told myself not to overthink. But deep down, I knew. One night I found a hotel receipt tucked inside his coat pocket. It wasn't mine. When I asked him, his voice didn't even tremble. "Her name's Tanya," he said, like it was normal, like I was supposed to just nod and move on. I sat in silence, holding my tea, feeling my whole body go cold. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I just stood up, walked to the bedroom, and started folding laundry. That's how I cope, by doing. Otis followed me, confused, sensing the storm without knowing the cause. I closed the door gently and cried into the sleeve of Clifford's old sweatshirt. I didn't understand how love could vanish so quietly. There was no big fight, just a slow, invisible unraveling until there was nothing left. 2 weeks later, he told me Tanya would be moving into our home. The same house I scrubbed floors in, hosted birthdays, planted marigolds out front. He said it like it was a business decision. "We need a fresh start," he mumbled, like I was the old wallpaper being stripped away. I moved into the guest room while Tanya moved into my life. She wore my robe, drank from my favorite mug. Even Otis stopped eating for days. I tried to stay calm for Otis, but every creak in the floorboards reminded me I didn't belong there anymore. Tanya giggled through my kitchen like she'd built it herself. Clifford acted like I was invisible. I felt like a ghost haunting a life that no longer needed me. I began packing slowly, just one box at a time. My books, my planner, my mother's old teacups. Every item felt like a tiny funeral. But then I found something that changed everything. At the bottom of the hallway closet, buried beneath an old box of tax papers, I found the house deed. My name was still on it, clear as day. Marjorie A. Bennett, co-owner. I held it in my hands like it was a lifeline. They thought I was just going to disappear quietly. But they were wrong, so very wrong. And the first step in my silent plan was already underway. If this story is touching something deep inside you, you're not alone. There are more stories like this one coming. Quiet strength, justice, healing. So please take a moment to subscribe and turn on notifications. You won't want to miss what comes next. A week after I started packing, an envelope slid under the motel room door. I recognized the handwriting immediately. It was Tanya's. I opened it with shaky fingers, hoping maybe, just maybe, it was an apology. But no, it was a printed letter, formal and cold. "Dear Marjorie," it began, like we were old friends sharing recipes. "Please arrange a time to collect your remaining belongings by Friday." That line alone stole the air from my lungs. She listed things like I was some tenant she'd never met. A box in the attic, mismatched dinnerware, and an old dog blanket. Old dog blanket? That was Otis's. The same one I'd knitted for him during Clifford's back surgery. Tanya wrote that she preferred I schedule a pickup time to avoid any awkwardness. Awkwardness. I laughed out loud, the kind of bitter laugh you don't want anyone to hear. I was being erased. Politely, of course. I folded the letter and placed it inside the Bible Mama left me. Between Psalms and Ecclesiastes, Otis nudged my leg with his nose, sensing my sadness. "It's okay, baby," I whispered, though nothing felt okay. I didn't call Tanya. I didn't respond. Instead, I walked Otis to the little patch of grass behind the motel and sat with him while the sun went down. I remembered all the nights he slept by my feet while I waited for Clifford to come home. That Friday, I showed up unannounced. Tanya answered the door wearing my robe, the one Clifford gave me on our 25th anniversary. She raised her eyebrows and said, "Didn't we agree on a time?" I didn't answer. Otis pushed past her and ran straight to his old spot by the fireplace. I stepped inside slowly, every object screaming memories. Tanya crossed her arms like she owned the place. Clifford wasn't home. Coward. I moved through the house like I was visiting my own grave. My cake stand was gone. My prayer candles replaced with modern art. Otis's bed was missing. I found it shoved in the garage, covered in paint cans. That was the final straw. I picked up Otis's bowl, his leash, and the crocheted blanket Tanya called old. I said nothing. I just gathered what mattered, and as I stood by the door, I turned and looked Tanya in the eye for the first time. "I won't be back," I said calmly, "but you might want to read the deed before you settle in too deep." Her face twisted in confusion. I handed her a copy of the ownership document, my name clear as daylight. "Have a nice evening," I added, as Otis and I walked out without looking back. What she didn't know yet was that I wasn't just visiting. I was preparing my return, and I had someone powerful on my side. The next morning I took Otis for a long walk around the block near the motel. He limped a little. His hips weren't what they used to be, but he kept close, tail wagging just enough to keep me steady. I had a folder tucked under my arm. Inside it was the deed I found, proof that half that house still belonged to me. Tanya didn't know it yet, but her victory parade was about to hit a wall. I wasn't going to fight loud. I was going to fight smart. I called Vivian Rhodes, a friend I hadn't seen since church potlucks back in '92. She was a lawyer now, tough as nails and quiet as a sermon. "Clifford left you, moved her in, and thinks you'll just walk away?" she asked. I nodded. "Not on my watch," she said, and slid the folder across her desk. She reviewed everything, the deed, the timeline, even Tanya's little letter. "We can file a partition action," she explained. "Force them to sell or buy you out." It sounded cold, legal, strategic, and exactly what I needed. I wasn't seeking revenge, I just wanted what was mine. Clifford thought I'd crumble. Tanya thought I'd vanish, but neither of them counted on the woman I'd become after all this. A woman who'd learned to lace silence with steel. Otis sat beside my chair in that office, looking up at me like he understood every word. I reached down and scratched behind his ears. "It's our turn now," I whispered. Vivian got things moving quickly. Court filings, notices, deadlines. Clifford called once, voice shaking, asking what I was doing. "Following the law," I said. Tanya left a voicemail too, accusing me of trying to destroy their life. I didn't respond. Let the papers speak. Let the silence echo. I wasn't going to explain myself anymore. I'd spent too many years doing that, justifying my worth, my space, my presence. Not anymore. When I showed up at the house a week later, with Otis, my spare key, and Vivian by my side, Tanya was livid. "You can't just walk in here," she screamed, but Vivian calmly handed her a court order. "Actually, she can." I walked straight to the living room, sat on the old recliner Clifford never bothered to replace, and exhaled like I'd been holding my breath for months. Otis laid down at my feet like he never left. It wasn't about reclaiming a couch or a corner of the house. It was about reclaiming myself. I wasn't the broken woman they expected. I was the co-owner they forgot to count. And now, with the law behind me and fire in my gut, I was just getting started, because the next court date was already set, and they were about to find out just how much damage one quiet woman could do with the truth in her hands. I didn't raise my voice, not once. While Tanya stomped around the kitchen muttering about entitlement, and Clifford sat on the edge of the bed with his head in his hands, I calmly unpacked a small tote bag, just a book, my Bible, and Otis's food bowl. I wasn't there to fight. I was there to remind them that I never left. Not legally, not emotionally. I had been part of that house's foundation. I just hadn't realized how strong I really was. Otis trotted behind me as I walked through each room, like I was visiting a memory. Tanya tried to shame me with her presence, wearing my old robe like a crown, but all I could think was how desperately she needed to prove she'd won. I smiled softly, poured myself a glass of water, and sat at the breakfast nook I'd once painted sunflower yellow. "You're not going to cause a scene?" she asked. "Why would I?" I replied. Steady as a stone, that calm unsettled them more than any argument could. Clifford avoided eye contact completely, suddenly more interested in the floor than in explaining anything. Tanya followed me with her phone in hand, whispering into it like I was a burglar. "She's just here," she said, confused and rattled. Otis laid down in the doorway, keeping watch like a sentinel. I'd never seen him so still, so alert. He knew, somehow, that we were reclaiming sacred ground. I stayed exactly 2 hours, just long enough for them to understand that I wasn't afraid of them or of what they tried to erase. I didn't touch their things. I didn't argue. I left a cup of tea steeping in the kitchen, a symbolic reminder that my presence was still steeped into every corner of that place. Tanya kept pacing, waiting for me to snap, but the more silent I stayed, the more nervous she became. Power doesn't always shout. As I left, I gently ran my hand along the banister Clifford once carved for me after my fall on the stairs. So many things had changed, but the house hadn't forgotten me. Vivian met me on the porch, briefcase in hand, and smiled. "They look shaken," she said. I nodded. "Good. Let them sit with it." It wasn't about revenge. It was about balance. About showing them that dignity doesn't mean weakness. It means choosing your battles wisely. But the true storm hadn't even arrived yet, because next week, in a courtroom neither of them ever expected to be in, their perfect little fantasy would begin to crumble. And I wouldn't even have to raise my voice, just my name on the deed and my hand on the Bible. The courtroom was colder than I expected. Sterile walls, humming lights, and that faint smell of coffee and nerves. I sat on the left side with Vivian beside me, calm as ever, flipping through papers like she'd done this 1,000 times. I wore my best cardigan, the navy one with the pearl buttons. Clifford sat across the aisle in a cheap suit, eyes sunken. Tanya didn't even show up. I guess it's easier to play powerful in someone else's house than face a judge. When the clerk read my name, Marjorie Ann Bennett, I felt something shift, like I'd stepped back into my own skin. Vivian stood and presented everything. The deed, the timeline, the co-ownership, the refusal to negotiate. Clifford barely spoke. He looked like he wanted the ground to open up beneath him. I watched his hands fidget in his lap, the same hands that used to hold mine. Now they just trembled. That part almost made me sad. Almost. Vivian was brilliant. She never raised her voice, never got emotional. She just laid out the truth like it was stone. I saw the judge lean forward when she brought up Tanya's involvement. How she moved in while I still lived there. The petitioner, she said, was not simply removed from her home emotionally, but physically replaced in it without proper resolution. That sentence stuck in the air like frost. Even Otis let out a low whine, resting under my chair. The ruling didn't take long. The judge said that if Clifford couldn't buy out my share of the house, which he clearly couldn't, then it must be sold. Period. The silence that followed felt louder than any gavel. Clifford's shoulders dropped. He didn't look angry. He looked defeated, like he realized too late that comfort built on cruelty has a short shelf life. Vivian squeezed my hand under the table. I didn't smile. I just closed my eyes and breathed. Outside the courthouse, the air felt different, lighter. Vivian laughed for the first time that day and said, "You held your own in there." I just nodded. "I wasn't alone," I said, looking down at Otis, who wagged his tail and leaned against my leg like he knew we'd won something sacred. It wasn't just about the house. It was about being seen, being heard, being counted. And no matter what came next, they couldn't take that away. But just as I was settling into the peace of that moment, I got a message that would shift everything again. Tanya had sent me a voice note, angry, desperate, and full of accusations. And what she said proved that their downfall had only just begun. Tanya's voice note played on my phone while I stood at the kitchen sink, rinsing dishes at the motel kitchenette. Her voice cracked between rage and fear. "You think you won? You ruined everything. Clifford can't sleep and I can't live like this. She paused, then muttered something about me being a bitter old woman with nothing better to do. I didn't reply. I just set the phone down and finished drying Otis's bowl. Silence was my answer now. Clifford called too. Twice. Left a voicemail. Both times. The first one was full of apologies. The second was more desperate. "Can we just talk?" he said. "You don't have to do this." But I did. And it was already done. I forwarded both messages to Vivian, then turned off my ringer. I wasn't going to let their panic become my responsibility. Not anymore. That burden had been lifted, and I had no intention of picking it back up. Otis sat by the window, nose pressed to the glass, watching people come and go. He didn't understand court rulings or property rights, but he understood peace. And for the first time in a long time, that's what our days felt like. I took long walks with him through quiet neighborhoods. We stopped at thrift stores. I read books again. I started knitting. I laughed out loud one morning when Otis stole my slipper. It had been years since I'd laughed like that. Meanwhile, Clifford and Tanya began to crumble. Vivian told me Tanya showed up at her office one afternoon, yelling about how I was ruining their future. Clifford missed 2 court deadlines. Tanya tried to file a complaint against me, but had no legal grounds. Their chaos was loud and messy. Mine was calm and precise. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't post anything online. I just showed up when it mattered, with Otis at my side and the truth in my corner. One afternoon, Clifford sent a single text. "I miss how things used to be." I stared at the words, feeling absolutely nothing. Not hate, not sorrow, just absence. That's what happens when you burn down a home and expect the ashes to still feel warm. I deleted the message without responding. Otis climbed onto the bed beside me, resting his head on my chest. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "We're almost there, sweetheart." And we were, because while they scrambled to fix a life built on betrayal, I was preparing something they never saw coming. A choice that would give me not just closure, but freedom. The sale was just days away, and what I planned to do with the money would leave them speechless. The house sold for $370,000. More than I expected. Vivian called me with the news, and I didn't even blink. I just sat in my motel room, hands in my lap, Otis resting his head on my foot like always. "It's done," she said. I nodded. Finally. There was no victory dance, no champagne, just quiet gratitude that it was over and that I had the power to choose what came next. I didn't buy a mansion. I didn't travel the world. I found a small, 2-bedroom cottage with a fenced yard for Otis and a screened-in porch for me. It needed work, paint, plumbing, patience. But it was mine, entirely mine. No shared deed, no lingering scent of betrayal in the curtains. I unpacked slowly. I picked out curtains I actually liked. I baked banana bread for the first time in years. And for once, I didn't feel like a guest in my own life. Otis loved the new house. He had a favorite spot under the oak tree where he'd nap in the afternoons. I'd sit beside him with a book and a cup of tea, sometimes not reading at all, just watching him breathe. Those were the moments that healed me more than any legal win. Peace doesn't arrive all at once. It seeps in through little moments, like hearing birds instead of raised voices, or folding towels without a pit in your stomach. One morning I hung up wind chimes near the kitchen window. The sound reminded me of my mother's porch, how she used to hum hymns while peeling apples. That memory brought tears to my eyes, but not sad ones, just soft human ones. Clifford and Tanya were no longer in my orbit, and for the first time I didn't care what they were doing, or who they were blaming. They weren't my story anymore. I had started a new chapter, and it was quiet and clean. Still, something kept tugging at me, a question that lingered as I watched Otis nap by the heater or sat at the window journaling. What do I do with the rest of this money? I didn't need it all. Not anymore. I had enough, more than enough, and I kept thinking about all the women like me, trapped, scared, erased by the people they loved. Maybe this wasn't just my win. Maybe it was a seed I could plant for someone else. That's when the idea came, clear, powerful, and impossible to ignore. I would donate $50,000, but not just anywhere. I wanted it to go to women who needed a lawyer like Vivian, but had no voice, no help. I wasn't just rebuilding my life anymore. I was building a bridge. And Tanya, she was about to find out that the woman she tried to erase had become a lifeline for others. The idea wouldn't let me go. I kept waking up with it in my chest. This pull to do something bigger than just start over. I'd been erased, humiliated, discarded like old furniture. But I survived. And more than that, I found a version of myself I hadn't met in decades. Strong, soft, and full of quiet fire. I didn't want to keep that for myself. I wanted to pass it on. So I called Vivian and asked if she knew of any legal aid groups for women. She gave me 3 names. One stood out. A small non-profit helping older women escape abusive or financially manipulative relationships. They were underfunded, stretched thin, but doing sacred work. I knew instantly. This was it. I wrote a check for $50,000 and folded it into an envelope. But I didn't stop there. I walked over to my bookshelf, pulled out a copy of Jane Eyre, and slipped something inside. It was a letter, handwritten. No name, no return address. Just truth. If you're reading this, I began, you've survived something no woman should have to. I want you to know you are not alone. What was stolen from you, your voice, your space, your worth, can be reclaimed. Quietly, powerfully, on your own terms. I'm living proof. I folded the letter, placed it in the book, and wrapped them both in brown paper. Otis sat beside me as I sealed the package. I kissed the top of his head and whispered, "We did something good today." He blinked slowly, then rested his chin on my knee. That moment will stay with me forever, not because of the money, but because of what it meant. I wasn't just healing. I was creating ripples that might reach someone I'll never meet. That was the justice I needed more than any courtroom could give. I dropped the package off in person, left it with the woman at the front desk, and walked away without saying a word. No cameras, no thank you letters, just silence, the kind that wraps around you like a warm blanket after a long, cold storm. That night, I lit a candle in Mama's teacup and sat on the porch with Otis by my side. The wind chimes sang softly. I closed my eyes and let the peace settle in my bones. But life has a funny way of surprising you when you think the story's done. Because just when I thought I was done giving, someone knocked on my door with a story of their own. And what they told me made me realize my purpose was far from over. I started waking up before sunrise again, not because I had to, but because I wanted to. The morning stillness felt like a reward, not a punishment. I'd pour a cup of tea, wrap myself in the same shawl Mama knitted before her hands gave out, and sit on the porch with Otis curled at my feet. It didn't take much anymore to feel full. The wind rustling through the trees, the sound of his breathing. Peace had finally found its way into my bones. I began journaling again, just a few lines each day. Some mornings, I wrote letters to my younger self. "You did your best," I'd say. "You were always enough." Other days I wrote to no one in particular, just gratitude scribbled on paper. I planted herbs in clay pots. I learned how to bake bread. I started volunteering at the library, reading to little ones whose laughter reminded me what softness sounds like. I was healing, slowly and deeply. People in town started recognizing me as that kind lady with the golden dog. I liked that. It was simple, honest. No one asked about my past. No one pitied me. They just accepted me. I made a few new friends, women like me, with weathered hands and strong hearts. We swapped recipes and laughter. I realized then that reinvention doesn't always mean big changes. Sometimes it just means choosing gentleness after years of surviving storms. Clifford never reached out again. Tanya disappeared into the background. I heard rumors, of course. Money troubles, a move out of state, but I didn't chase those stories. I had my own life now, uncomplicated, rooted, real, and the best part? I'd stopped waiting for closure from people who never offered it. I found it in the smallest acts of self-respect. returning library books on time, brushing Otis's fur, folding clean laundry with care. One afternoon, I found the crocheted blanket Tanya once called old, folded in Otis's basket. He was dozing on it, snoring softly, his paw twitching in some happy dream. I smiled and felt something inside me settle. That blanket had seen every version of me, the hopeful wife, the broken woman, the quiet fighter, the reborn soul, and now it rested beneath the most loyal heart I'd ever known. That felt like poetry, but just when I thought I'd written the final page of this chapter, a letter arrived. No return address, just my name, written in block letters. I opened it slowly, heart steady, until I read the first line, and my hands began to shake. The letter was short, just 5 lines, but it hit me harder than any of Tanya's accusations or Clifford's silence. I found your note in the book. I don't know who you are, but your words stopped me from going back to him. I'm staying at a shelter now. I just wanted to say thank you. No name, no signature, just impact. I sat there for a long time, holding that paper in both hands, blinking through the tears I didn't expect. Otis rested his head on my lap like he always did, when something cracked inside me. I stroked his fur slowly, whispering, "We did the right thing, didn't we?" He didn't move, just breathed steady, solid, safe. That letter meant the world. It meant my story hadn't just been a storm. I had become someone else's umbrella, not through noise or drama, but through truth, through quiet, powerful truth that no one could take back. I walked to the bookshelf and pulled down Mama's Bible. Tucked between the pages was my own note to myself from the beginning of this mess. Don't lose your softness. It's your strength. I smiled at it now, not because the pain was gone, but because I finally understood what it taught me. Softness isn't weakness. Silence isn't surrender. And love, real love, doesn't ask you to shrink to fit someone else's life. That afternoon, I made a cup of tea, wrapped myself in Mama's shawl, and sat on the porch while Otis dozed in the sun. I thought about everything I'd lost and what I'd gained. I'd lost a husband, a house, and the illusion that I needed either to matter. But I'd gained something better. Myself, fully, quietly, completely. And with that came something even rarer. Peace that didn't beg for permission. I don't know where Clifford is now. I don't care. I hope Tanya finds whatever peace she couldn't steal from me. I'm not angry anymore. I'm not waiting for apologies. I'm too busy living. My days are slower now, softer. And every morning when I wake up and see Otis wagging his tail, I remember. I didn't just survive betrayal. I turned it into something that could save someone else. That's what makes this ending worth every page. He told me I was invisible. Now I'm unforgettable. That's what they never saw coming. So, if you're watching this, and you've ever been told you're too old to start over, too quiet to matter, too soft to stand up for yourself, let me tell you something, friend. They were wrong. They have no idea what a quiet woman can do when she finally remembers who she is.